She sat alone at a wedding, her dress elegant, her smile practiced, but her heart carrying the quiet ache of being out of place. Claire Whitmore, a sharp financial journalist, was used to boardrooms and deadlines, not ballrooms shimmering with chandeliers. Surrounded by whispers, she braced herself for another long night of judgmental stares. And then, a stranger appeared. Ethan Marlowe, tall, enigmatic. A CEO whose reputation was as cold as his steel-gray eyes leaned down and whispered the words that would change everything. Pretend you're with me. What began as a simple charade to silence gossip soon spiraled into something neither of them could control. Was it all just an act, or the start of something real? And when betrayal, danger, and a deadly secret threatened to tear them apart, would love prove stronger than suspicion? Could a relationship born out of pretense survive the harsh light of truth? Stay with us, because this isn't just a love story. It's a story of integrity, sacrifice, and two hearts learning that the most unexpected beginnings can lead to forever. If this story stirs your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's step into the first chapter. The chandeliers shimmered like 1,000 drops of frozen sunlight, casting their golden glow across the ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel in Savannah, Georgia. Satin ribbons trailed from every chair. Crystal glasses sparkled at every table, and the air smelled faintly of roses and champagne. It was the kind of place where every detail whispered wealth, refinement, and elegance. For most of the guests, it was a fairy tale. For Claire Whitmore, it felt like a stage on which she didn't quite belong. She sat at a round table tucked away near the far end of the room, her posture straight, her smile polite, though her hands twisted nervously in her lap beneath the white linen cloth. She had chosen her dress carefully, a soft navy gown with a modest neckline, paired with silver heels that pinched just enough to remind her she was out of practice when it came to glamorous evenings like this. Claire was 32, a financial journalist who spent most of her nights surrounded not by chandeliers and champagne, but by coffee mugs, laptop screens, and stacks of reports that smelled faintly of printer ink. She was good at her work, sharp, persistent, unafraid of chasing uncomfortable truths, but social events like this, she often felt like a guest at someone else's party, even when she had a legitimate invitation. The bride tonight was one of her closest college friends, a woman who now seemed almost to belong to a different world. Claire had hugged her earlier, admired the dress, and shared a laugh that carried the easy affection of old times. But the bride was now busy with the groom, with photos, with 100 guests to greet. And so, Claire was left alone at the table, her place card a silent reminder that she didn't come with anyone by her side. She lifted her glass of champagne, not so much to drink as to shield herself. The bubbles tickled her nose, but the real sting came from the whispers she imagined, or maybe overheard around her. She came alone, no ring, no partner. Poor thing. She's a journalist, right? Always buried in work, figures. She told herself she didn't care. She was strong enough, independent enough, to rise above the petty judgments of strangers. And most days, that was true. But tonight, in this sea of glittering gowns and polished smiles, her solitude glowed like a spotlight. Her gaze drifted across the ballroom. Couples swayed on the polished dance floor as a string quartet played something soft and romantic. Waiters moved like shadows, refilling glasses, offering trays of hors d'oeuvres. At the center of it all, the bride glowed, her happiness so radiant it made Claire's chest ache with a mix of joy and an ache she dared not name. She tapped the rim of her glass, glancing at the massive clock above the stage, barely 7:30. It was far too early to slip out unnoticed, and leaving early would feel like a betrayal of her friend. So she stayed, anchored to her lonely seat, pretending to be at ease. Inside, though, her thoughts churned. Why do people always measure a woman by who's sitting next to her? Why can't being here for a friend, being content in my own skin, be enough? Maybe I should have brought someone, anyone, just to blend in. But would that really make me less alone? She set the glass down and exhaled softly. The truth was, loneliness wasn't a stranger to her. It was something she had learned to live with, in between late-night deadlines and early morning coffee. She had dated in the past briefly, half-heartedly, but her career always seemed to stretch between her and anyone else like a gulf. She told herself she had chosen this life, chosen independence, chosen the pursuit of truth over comfort. Yet, nights like this, under the dazzling lights of other people's happily ever afters, that choice felt heavier. Across the table, a woman in a sequin dress leaned toward her husband, their whispers not as hushed as they probably imagined. Claire caught the words sitting all alone and forced herself to smile as if she hadn't heard. She reached for her phone, tempted to scroll mindlessly, but tucked it back into her clutch. She wasn't going to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her retreat into the glow of a screen. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and watched the room. If nothing else, she could pretend to be an observer like any good journalist cataloging details. The way the groom's hand lingered on his bride's waist, the way an older couple swayed together, still laughing softly as if no one else existed, the way ambition, wealth, and affection all mingled under chandeliers. She told herself she was simply gathering material, tucking away impressions for some future article. But beneath that rationalization, she knew what she was really doing. She was fighting the hollow feeling in her chest, the one that whispered she was invisible here, a placeholder at someone else's celebration. And then she caught herself wondering if anyone did notice her. What did they see? A woman in her early 30s, attractive but understated, sitting alone at a table for two. Did they see strength or pity? Did they see a woman who chose her independence or one who had been left behind? Her hands tightened on the stem of her glass. She hated that she cared what they thought. She hated that she could be fierce when interviewing executives, relentless when uncovering corruption. But here, under the soft music and romantic lighting, she felt small. The band shifted into a waltz. More couples filled the floor, moving gracefully as though rehearsed for weeks. Claire's eyes followed them until her vision blurred slightly with unshed tears. She blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. A waiter stopped by her table. "Would you like another drink?" "Ma'am?" She shook her head with a polite smile. "No, thank you." When he left, the empty chair beside her seemed to grow heavier, louder, as if mocking her solitude. She exhaled slowly, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, whispering to herself, "It's just one night. You'll survive. You always do." She didn't know, of course, that one whispered sentence was about to unravel that lonely certainty. She didn't know that a stranger was about to claim the empty seat beside her and change the course of her life. Claire had just set her glass back on the table, ready to count down the minutes until it would be polite enough to leave, when a shadow fell across her. She looked up. The man was tall, easily over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block the chandelier's light. His suit was cut in a way that spoke of precision and wealth, dark charcoal with a subtle sheen, the kind of tailoring you couldn't buy off a rack. His tie was silver silk, knotted with effortless care, but it wasn't the clothing that stole Claire's breath for half a second. It was the man himself. His face was sharply defined, handsome in a way that felt both intimidating and magnetic. His hair was dark, brushed neatly back, and his gray eyes scanned the room with a coolness that seemed unshakable. He carried an air of command, the kind of presence that made people move aside without even realizing they were doing it, and without asking permission. He slid into the empty chair beside her. Claire stiffened. "Excuse me." He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on a table across the room, where a cluster of guests leaned in close, whispering and stealing glances toward her. Then, with a voice so low it was almost a breath against her ear, he said, "Pretend you're with me." Claire froze. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. "I'm sorry," what she whispered back, leaning away. He finally turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her pulse stumble. "They're gossiping," he said evenly. "You don't want their pity. and I don't want their schemes. If you don't mind, we'll act as though we came together." Claire's lips parted in disbelief. "You think I'll just play along with a stranger?" His mouth curved, not into a smile, but something close. A flicker of amusement beneath the ice. "You could refuse, but they've already noticed us. If you agree, it spares you their stares, and spares me from a setup I'd rather avoid." She followed his gaze and saw it 2 women across the room, eyes darting from him to a younger socialite at their table, whispering conspiratorially. A blind introduction, an arrangement. He was dodging them. Claire let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. "This is ridiculous." "Maybe," he said, his tone as smooth as the champagne in her glass. "But it works. We both win." She studied him more closely now. The name surfaced in her mind with a jolt. Ethan Marlowe. The Ethan Marlowe CEO of Marlowe Ventures, a tech investment firm that had risen like a storm in the past decade. She had written about him once, tangentially, in an article on emerging investment leaders. He was famous for his cold efficiency, for deals that seemed ruthless yet brilliant. And now he was sitting next to her, asking her to play pretend. Claire tilted her head, narrowing her eyes. "And what do I call you in this little charade, mysterious stranger, corporate mogul?" His gray eyes held hers, steady and unreadable. "Ethan," he said simply. "Claire," she replied, almost against her will, as though introducing herself sealed some unspoken agreement. He leaned back, draping one arm casually over the back of her chair. The move was practiced, effortless, but the nearness of him made Claire sit a little straighter, her heart giving a warning thump. Around them, she caught the ripple people noticed. Whispers shifted, expressions softened from pity into curiosity, even envy. She pressed her lips together, biting back a laugh. "So, this is your strategy. Walk into a stranger's evening and recruit them as your shield." "Only when necessary," Ethan said, his tone calm, deliberate. "And tonight, it was necessary." Claire arched a brow. "You must be very practiced at this." "Not really," he said, glancing back at the women across the room, their plans visibly unraveling. "But I am practiced at survival. In this crowd, appearances matter." Claire sipped from her glass, hiding the twitch of a smile. Survival. That's dramatic for a wedding reception. "You'd be surprised," Ethan murmured. His gaze flicked toward her again, sharper this time. "You looked like you could use an escape, too." The words hit closer than she wanted them to. Claire bristled, shifting her shoulders. "And what exactly gave me away?" "The way you check your watch every few minutes," he said evenly. "The way you lift your glass to hide your expression. And the way you sit just far enough from the table to suggest you're ready to leave at any second." Her cheeks warmed. She wasn't used to being read so easily. "So, now you're not only my pretend date, you're also an analyst of human behavior." He gave a quiet chuckle, the first genuine sound of warmth she'd heard from him. "Observation is part of my work, and part of my nature." Claire shook her head, exhaling a soft laugh. "You're unbelievable. And yet," Ethan said, his voice low and steady, "you're still here, playing along." She hated that he was right. Around them, the music swelled, couples twirled, glasses clinked, and yet the corner of the ballroom seemed to shrink, leaving just the two of them caught in an odd, unexpected orbit. She told herself it was just a game, just a brief arrangement to fend off prying eyes. But a whisper deep inside admitted something she didn't want to name. She wasn't entirely disappointed. For the first time all evening, the empty chair beside her didn't feel so heavy. The music shifted, the waltz drifting into something livelier, and Claire realized she had become part of a scene she hadn't auditioned for. Ethan's arm was still draped over the back of her chair, his posture relaxed, as though this had been their arrangement all along. He leaned slightly toward her whenever someone walked by, the subtle gesture sending a clear message, "We are together." It worked. She saw it in the glances cast their way, eyebrows lifting, whispers muttering, eyes darting with interest. The pity she had endured just moments earlier had vanished. In its place was curiosity, even admiration. She, the woman sitting alone, now appeared to be the companion of Ethan Marlowe, the man half the room had likely been hoping to corner tonight. "Do you see it?" Ethan's voice was low, calm, carrying just enough for her to hear. "See what?" Claire murmured back, her smile fixed for the benefit of nearby eyes. "The way the narrative has changed," he said, his gaze scanning the room with clinical precision. "They were judging you. Now they're curious about you. And by extension, about me." Claire resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "You make it sound like a business transaction. In this world, almost everything is," Ethan replied without apology. A couple approached their table, an older man with silver hair and his wife in a gown of emerald silk. "Ethan," the man greeted warmly, "we didn't expect to see you here tonight, and with such a lovely companion, no less." Ethan rose smoothly, extending a hand. "Arthur, good to see you." He gestured toward Claire. "This is Claire Whitmore." Arthur's wife leaned closer, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "How long have you two been together?" Claire blinked, caught off guard. Before she could stammer out an answer, Ethan replied with unflinching calm, "Long enough to know she's the most interesting woman in the room." Claire's lips parted, her protest swallowed by the smoothness of his delivery. The older couple chuckled approvingly, offered their congratulations, and moved on. When they were gone, Claire hissed softly under her breath, "You're outrageous." Ethan finally allowed the smallest flicker of a smile. "You handled it well." "I didn't handle anything. You just made something up. That's what pretending requires." She shook her head, a nervous laugh slipping free. "If you're this convincing with strangers, I can't imagine what you're like in negotiations." "You don't have to imagine," he said. "You're seeing it firsthand." Claire pressed her fingers to her glass, grounding herself. Part of her wanted to push back, to tell him she wasn't a pawn in some game of appearances. But another part, one she didn't want to admit existed, felt strangely lighter. For once, she wasn't the woman alone at the table. She was part of the story unfolding in the room. As the evening continued, Ethan made their partnership look effortless. When a group approached, he introduced her with ease, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. When someone asked about her work, he steered the conversation smoothly, giving her space to answer, but shielding her from probing questions. He didn't embellish or invent details, he allowed her to speak for herself, but the way he stood beside her, attentive yet unobtrusive, lent her a kind of authority she hadn't expected. Claire, on the other hand, stumbled through the performance. She tripped over her words once when a woman asked how they met, and Ethan, without missing a beat, supplied a vague but charming answer about a fortunate encounter. She nearly spilled her wine when a waiter passed too close, and Ethan steadied her glass with a calm hand before anyone noticed. It was infuriating how smooth he was, and how much easier it made everything. As the night wore on, Claire felt her resistance softening. She laughed more than she expected, though she told herself it was only for the sake of the act. When Ethan leaned in to murmur a quick aside, a wry observation about a pompous guest, a subtle joke about the music, it pulled a genuine smile from her. And yet, each time, she reminded herself silently, "This isn't real. Don't let it be real." Still, her heart betrayed her. Each brush of his hand, each steady glance, sent ripples through her that had nothing to do with pretense. At one point, as the band swelled into another slow number, Ethan inclined his head slightly. "Shall we?" Claire blinked. "Dance people expect it," he said simply. Her instinct was to refuse. She hadn't danced properly in years, and the thought of fumbling under all those watchful eyes made her stomach tighten. But before she could argue, Ethan rose and extended his hand. His expression was unreadable, his voice low and certain. "Trust me." She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, and he led her onto the floor with a confidence that left her no choice but to follow. The moment they began to move, she realized he was guiding her as though she were made of porcelain, gentle but sure. Her awkwardness melted into his rhythm, her steps aligning almost without thought. Around them, couples swayed, but Claire's focus narrowed to the steady cadence of his breath, the warmth of his hand at her back, the calm assurance in his gaze. "You're surprisingly good at this," she murmured, unable to resist. "So are you," Ethan replied, his tone carrying the faintest trace of warmth. "You just needed a partner." Her heart stumbled at the words. She reminded herself again, pretend, that's all this is. But as the music wrapped around them, Claire couldn't deny the spark beneath the act, a spark that frightened her almost as much as it thrilled her. When the song ended, Ethan guided her back to their table. Claire's pulse was still racing, though she kept her expression composed. She sipped her champagne, letting the bubbles disguise her fluster. Across the room, she caught sight of the same couple who had whispered about her earlier. Now, they weren't whispering. They were staring openly, curiosity painted across their faces. Claire straightened her shoulders, meeting their gaze without flinching. For the first time that night, she didn't feel like the lonely woman in the corner. She felt like someone seen, someone chosen, and that scared her, because if she let herself enjoy this too much, she wasn't sure she'd be able to separate what was pretend from what was dangerously close to real. The wedding had come and gone, but the memory lingered like a stubborn melody Claire couldn't shake. She had returned to her routine early mornings at the newsroom, late nights with endless spreadsheets, coffee cooling beside her keyboard. On the surface, nothing had changed, but whenever her mind drifted, she found herself recalling the weight of a hand steadying her wine glass, the cool timbre of a voice whispering, "Pretend you're with me." She had told herself it was nothing, a strange evening, a fleeting charade, the kind of story you file away to laugh about with friends someday. Ethan Marlowe belonged to another world, one of glass towers, press conferences, and stock market headlines. She had stepped into his orbit only by chance, and yet, 3 days later, his orbit found her again. Claire stepped out of the Savannah Chronicle's office building that Wednesday evening, her heels clicking softly against the sidewalk. The sun had dipped low, streaking the sky with pink and gold. She was still replaying an interview in her head when a sleek black sedan pulled to the curb. The tinted window lowered with mechanical smoothness, and there he was, Ethan Marlowe. Ethan. His expression was composed, as always, though his gray eyes caught the dying light, sharp and unwavering. Claire stopped short. "You've got to be kidding." "Get in," he said simply, as though the matter had already been decided. Her instinct was to laugh and walk away, but something in his tone, steady, commanding, yet not unkind, made her hesitate. Against her better judgment, she slid into the back seat. The leather smelled faintly of cedar and something darker, like sandalwood. The door closed with a soft thud, sealing her in a world entirely unlike the newsroom she had just left. Ethan regarded her for a moment before speaking. "I'll be direct. At the wedding, people noticed us. Since then, the speculation has grown. The media, shareholders, even competitors, they all wonder why I don't have someone at my side." Claire folded her arms. "And this is my problem because, Ethan said calmly, "you solved it once without even realizing, and I'd like you to solve it again." She blinked. "You're proposing what exactly? That I become your decoy, my girlfriend," he said plainly. Then, before she could scoff, he added, "Pretend. Of course. Appearances matter in my field. Stability reassures investors. And someone like you, sharp, confident, unafraid of scrutiny, fits the role." Claire stared at him, incredulous. "You make it sound like you're hiring an employee, not asking a favor." "In a sense, I am," Ethan replied. "This is mutually beneficial. I gain relief from speculation. You gain access to circles you wouldn't otherwise enter." Her pulse ticked up a notch. Access. Claire had been chasing threads for months, a murky trail of financial transfers, whispers of offshore accounts, corruption bleeding through the upper crust of business and politics. She had names, fragments, but no door into the gilded world where those secrets lived, and now Ethan was offering her a key. She tried to mask the flicker of interest behind a scoff. So, I just parade around at your side, smile for cameras, and play the devoted companion. Ethan's gaze held hers steadily. You'd be free to walk away at any time. No contract, just an understanding. But if you agree, you'll see a side of this city most never glimpse. Claire leaned back against the cool leather, her mind racing. She could picture it already: charity galas, investment dinners, gatherings where money moved quietly in the shadows. If she played this part, she might gather the proof she needed for her investigation. But at what cost? Her conscience whispered sharply, "You'd be using him, trading your integrity for access. Isn't that the very kind of compromise you criticize in others?" Her heart whispered something else. "Be careful. This isn't just about your work. This man unsettles you in ways you don't understand." She glanced at Ethan again. His face was unreadable, carved in control. Yet she remembered the subtle warmth in his laugh at the wedding, the gentleness in the way he had guided her steps. He was not so easily placed into a single category of cold executive or opportunist, and that complexity tugged at her more than she wanted to admit. Finally, she exhaled. And what's in it for me, besides awkward parties and sore feet from heels? Respect, discretion, Ethan said evenly. Then, after a pause, and a chance to be underestimated by no one. The phrasing caught her off guard. It wasn't a compliment in the usual sense, but something sharper, more deliberate. He had noticed her strength, her independence. He valued it, or at least, he knew how to frame it. Claire looked down at her hands, weighing the scales in her mind. Professional duty on one side, personal ethics on the other. The journalist in her screamed that this was dangerous, that she risked losing herself in a story that was no longer objective. The woman in her whispered that maybe, just maybe, she was tired of standing alone in corners. When she looked up again, her decision was not final, but it was forming. "Temporary," she said firmly. "If I find this unbearable, I walk away." Ethan inclined his head. Agreed. The car slowed, pulling to the curb again, this time outside her apartment building. Claire reached for the handle, then paused. "One more thing. Don't think for a second I'll play the silent accessory. If I see something wrong, I'll speak, even if it's inconvenient for you." For the first time that evening, Ethan's lips curved in something close to a smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Claire stepped out onto the sidewalk, the night air cool against her skin. The sedan pulled away, its taillights glowing red before vanishing into traffic. She stood for a long moment, clutching her bag, her thoughts tangled. She had told herself she would never compromise her principles. But tonight, compromise had come, wrapped in the promise of opportunity and perhaps something more dangerous. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, one thought echoed in her mind, equal parts warning and temptation. What began as pretend could quickly become far too real. The invitation arrived on heavy cream paper, embossed with gold lettering that practically shimmered. A charity gala at a historic mansion in Charleston, hosted by one of the region's oldest families. The kind of event where fortunes were whispered about in corners and reputations were cemented or destroyed by the company one kept. Claire turned the card over in her hand, sitting at her small kitchen table with an unfinished mug of coffee. She had been to fundraisers before, but nothing of this magnitude. Certainly not as the so-called companion of Ethan Marlowe. The drive to Charleston took less than 2 hours, but Claire felt every minute stretch as the city's cobblestone streets and antebellum houses came into view. Ethan's car rolled past iron gates into the mansion grounds, where lanterns lit the oak-lined driveway. The house rose before them, its white columns glowing beneath the warm light, as though plucked from another century. Inside, the air smelled of lilacs and polished wood. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers. Guests floated in gowns of silk and tuxedos cut to perfection. Claire stepped in cautiously, her heels catching slightly on the polished floor. She winced, first battle of the evening already lost. Ethan's hand brushed against her elbow, steadying her. "Careful," he murmured. His tone was practical, but his touch lingered just long enough to unsettle her. "Remind me why I agreed to this?" she muttered. "Because you're curious," Ethan replied, his lips barely moving as he guided her through the entrance. "And because you don't back down from a challenge." Claire shot him a sidelong glance. "Do you rehearse lines like that, or do they come naturally?" "Neither," he said. "I just pay attention." The words caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to retort, then closed it, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of knowing he had disarmed her. They moved into the grand ballroom, where music from a live quartet drifted through the air. Tables were set with crystal glasses and arrangements of white hydrangeas. Servers glided past with trays of champagne. Claire reached for a glass, more for something to hold than to drink, and nearly knocked it into another guest's arm. She managed to save it at the last second, but not gracefully. Ethan leaned down slightly. "Relax your grip. It's a glass, not an opponent." Her jaw tightened, but a laugh slipped out despite herself. "Easy for you to say. You were probably born in a tuxedo." He gave a rare smile, faint but real. "Not quite, but I've had practice." They drifted toward a cluster of guests near the fireplace. Claire straightened her shoulders, preparing for the questions she knew would come, and they came quickly. "So, Ethan?" One man greeted warmly, shaking his hand. "We've heard whispers about this lovely lady. Care to introduce us properly?" Ethan's gaze shifted to Claire, his voice calm and deliberate. "This is Claire Whitmore. She has a remarkable eye for detail and a talent for keeping me from getting lost in my own head." Claire blinked. That wasn't the fabricated answer she had expected. He hadn't spun some tale of romance or exaggerated charm. Instead, he had highlighted her strengths' real ones. The compliment, delivered so casually, sent a ripple of warmth through her chest. The man smiled approvingly. "Well, she's certainly keeping good company tonight." As the conversation swirled around them, Claire found herself both playing along and quietly studying Ethan. He was polished, yes, but not quite the icy figure she had read about in business articles. When he laughed, and he did, occasionally it was softer than she imagined, almost reluctant, as though laughter was something he allowed only in rare moments. When he glanced at her, it wasn't just to maintain the pretense, it was as though he was measuring her, trying to read what lay beneath her practiced composure. Later, as they navigated toward the buffet table, Claire whispered, "Do you always have to be so perfect?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Perfect. The way you move, the way you answer, the way you make people feel like you belong everywhere." He considered her for a moment. "Belonging is an illusion. I've learned to project what people expect. That doesn't mean I always feel it." The honesty in his tone startled her. She expected arrogance, not admission. "So, you're saying even Ethan Marlowe feels out of place sometimes?" His gaze shifted toward the crowd, his voice dropping. "More often than you'd think?" Claire fell silent, her curiosity sharpening. For the first time, she sensed the cracks in his armor, not weakness, exactly, but humanity. Beneath the polish and control, there was someone who carried weight, someone who wasn't untouched by the expectations pressing in from all sides. The evening stretched on, and though Claire stumbled once or twice, nearly missing a step on the sweeping staircase, fumbling slightly with a fork at the elaborate dinner setting, Ethan was always there, subtly covering for her. A steadying hand, a quick shift of conversation, a quiet word to redirect attention. To others, it must have looked seamless. To Claire, it was maddening and reassuring all at once. As they prepared to leave, the cool night air brushing against them, Claire turned to him. "Why me, Ethan? Out of all the women you could have chosen to play this part, why me?" He paused before answering, his expression unreadable. Because you don't pretend unless you choose to. And when you do, people believe you. Claire swallowed hard, her heart tripping over itself. He walked ahead to open the car door, leaving her standing for a moment beneath the lantern light, unsettled by how his words lingered. It was supposed to be pretend, but tonight, it felt dangerously close to something else. The following week, Ethan invited Claire to an art exhibition at the Charleston Museum of Fine Arts. It was a quiet evening affair, the kind that drew donors, critics, and patrons of culture rather than the glittering masses of a gala. The building itself was a marble steps leading up to tall glass doors, banners announcing the featured exhibition, Visions of Light European Masters, 1850, 1920. Claire followed Ethan inside, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The galleries glowed with muted lighting, canvases of landscapes and portraits displayed with reverence. The air smelled faintly of varnish and old stone. Guests moved slowly, wine glasses in hand, their voices hushed as though the paintings demanded reverence. Claire wasn't sure what to expect. She knew Ethan as a strategist, a man who measured each word like currency. She did not picture him lingering over brushstrokes. Yet, as they entered the main hall, she noticed him pause before a large painting of a stormy sea. His expression shifted subtle, but enough for her to see it. The cool precision softened into something distant, almost vulnerable. "She used to love these," he said quietly. Claire blinked. "Who? My mother?" Ethan's eyes remained on the painting. She was a pianist. Classical music was her world, but she had a fondness for art, too, especially pieces like this. She said the sea reminded her that beauty could be wild, not just polished. Claire turned to him, surprised by the openness in his tone. "I didn't know you lost her." He nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "I was 10. She died suddenly. After that, my father, well, he didn't believe in beauty for beauty's sake. He believed in discipline, perfection, silence." The words carried a weight she hadn't heard from him before, a confession unwrapped from the armor he wore in public. For a moment, Claire didn't know what to say. She wanted to reach for his hand, to bridge the quiet ache she sensed in him, but she stopped herself. Instead, she offered softly, "She must have been remarkable. To leave such an impression on you at that age." Ethan's gaze flicked to her then, his gray eyes glinting not with ice, but with memory. "She was, and sometimes, in places like this, I almost hear her again." The air between them thickened, fragile with something Claire couldn't name. Her chest tightened, not with pity but with recognition. This was a man who carried ghosts, who had built his empire not from cold ambition alone, but from absence, from loss. Her pulse quickened. It was dangerous, she knew, to see him this way. Dangerous to let empathy blur the lines of her mission. She reminded herself silently, "You are here to observe, to gather, to remember who he is in the world you investigate." And fate, almost cruelly, reminded her at that very moment. As Ethan moved ahead to greet a curator, Claire lingered near a side gallery, pretending to study a portrait. Two men stood nearby, their voices low but edged with urgency. She recognized one of them instantly, a regional banker whose name had surfaced in her notes. "The Cayman transfers went through last quarter," the man whispered. "If Marlowe's people keep funneling money that way, it'll raise red flags." The other man shook his head. "He won't get caught. They've buried the paper trail. Besides, Ethan's signature alone keeps the board at ease." Claire's breath caught. Cayman transfers. Ethan's signature. She forced herself to remain still, her eyes fixed on the painting before her as though lost in admiration. But her ears strained to catch every word. The men moved on, their conversation dissolving into the murmur of the crowd. Claire's grip tightened around her clutch. Her journalist instinct screamed, "There it is, a lead. Proof that Marlowe Ventures may be tied to offshore laundering." But her heart recoiled. Ethan, who had just shared a piece of his mother with her, who had revealed the cracks in his carefully constructed armor, was at the center of it all. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. When Ethan returned, his expression composed once more. She forced a smile. "Learning anything from the masters?" he asked lightly. "Plenty," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. They moved through the rest of the exhibition together, but Claire's mind was a storm. Every glance at him carried double weight, now the man whose presence steadied her steps, and the man whose name was whispered in conversations about hidden funds and fraud. That night, as they stepped into the cool Charleston air, Claire found herself walking a fragile line between two truths. One, she was dangerously touched by the human side of Ethan Marlowe. Two, she could not ignore the shadow gathering around his name. And deep inside, she feared that whichever truth she followed would cost her something she wasn't ready to lose. Claire often thought of her life in neat compartments: work, family, the rare weekend coffee with an old friend. But ever since Ethan Marlowe had walked into her orbit, those compartments had begun to blur until she barely recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror. By day, she was Claire Whitmore, investigative journalist. Her world smelled of ink, coffee, and fluorescent-lit offices. She buried herself in financial statements, followed trails of numbers across spreadsheets, and scribbled notes in the margins of leaked reports. The newsroom was loud, chaotic phones ringing, editors barking, keyboards clattering like rain on glass. In that environment, Claire felt sharp, alive, and certain of her purpose. But by night, she was someone else entirely. Ethan's companion, his supposed girlfriend. She wore dresses borrowed from boutiques she couldn't afford, heels that pinched her toes, and smiles she wasn't sure belonged to her. She attended galas where champagne flowed like water, and conversations glittered with false charm. She stood beside Ethan as flashes from cameras captured them together, her hand resting lightly on his arm, his gaze steady and composed. Sometimes, when she returned home past midnight, she would collapse on her couch and whisper to herself, "I'm living two lives." It was intoxicating and exhausting in equal measure. One evening, hunched over her laptop at the Chronicle, Claire traced another financial thread. The name appeared again and again: BLC Holdings, a subsidiary tied to shell accounts overseas. And then, in the scanned pages she had painstakingly collected, she saw it sharp, decisive, unmistakable. Ethan Marlowe's signature. Her breath caught. It was right there, inked at the bottom of approval forms authorizing massive transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. The very scheme whispered about at the art exhibition. Claire leaned back in her chair, her stomach twisting. She knew his handwriting. She had seen it once when he had scribbled a note on the back of a dinner menu, teasing her about her preference for strong coffee. The strokes were identical. "God," she whispered, "is it real?" Her rational mind urged caution. Signatures could be forged. Scans could be doctored. But the evidence in front of her was damning, and her editor had been pressing her for weeks to deliver something solid. Her conscience tore in two directions. On one side, her duty. She had chosen journalism because she believed in truth, in shining light where shadows grew thick. If Ethan was guilty, if he was orchestrating fraud on a massive scale, she had no choice but to expose it. On the other side, Ethan himself, the man who steadied her at every public misstep, who introduced her not as an accessory, but as someone sharp and capable, who spoke of his mother's love for music with a softness she hadn't expected. Could that same man be the architect of corruption? The questions circled her like vultures. Was I chosen as a convenient mask, or was I chosen because he thought I could be trusted? Am I falling for him? Or am I falling into a trap? The following night only deepened the conflict. Ethan had invited her to yet another gala, this one in Atlanta, hosted at a glass-walled skyscraper overlooking the city lights. She arrived in a midnight blue gown, her hair pinned neatly back, her expression calm despite the storm inside her. Ethan met her at the entrance, his presence commanding even in the chaos of arriving guests. "You look..." He paused, his gaze sweeping her quietly. "Perfect." She swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Don't rehearse lines with me," Ethan, I'll know. He smirked faintly. I wasn't rehearsing. The evening unfolded as so many had before: handshakes, laughter, cameras. Ethan moved effortlessly through the crowd, and Claire played her role by his side, yet beneath the polished veneer, her mind kept circling back to the signature on those documents. At one point, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, she turned to him. Do you ever feel like people only see the surface of you, the version you present, not the truth? Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes reflecting the skyline. Every day. And does it bother you? She asked softly. His answer came after a long pause. It used to. Now I accept it. Maybe the surface is all people really want to see. Claire studied him in the dim light. He was speaking with honesty, she could tell. But was it the honesty of a man misunderstood, or the honesty of a man skilled at disguising deeper wrongs? Her heart wanted to believe the former. Her notes screamed the latter. When she returned home that night, she sat on her couch, the gown still clinging to her shoulders, her bare feet curled beneath her. She opened her laptop and stared again at the forged or perhaps genuine signature. If it was real, Ethan was guilty. If it was forged, he was a victim. And in either case, she was falling deeper into something she wasn't sure she could climb out of. It happened on a Friday morning. Claire had barely settled at her desk when her phone buzzed. No caller ID, just a single clipped message. Come down. I'm waiting. Her stomach dropped. She knew, even before she stepped outside, who it would be. Ethan Marlowe stood at the curb, his black sedan gleaming under the sun. He wasn't wearing his usual mask of composure. His face was carved in stone, his eyes stripped of the cool gentleness she had glimpsed in quieter moments. This was the man the business world feared, the CEO with a reputation for ruthless clarity. Ethan. She started, then caught herself. Ethan! Don't! He snapped, his voice low and jagged. Don't say my name like you have the right. The words cut so sharply she flinched. What's going on? He stepped closer, the restraint in his movements more terrifying than rage. You've been digging into my company. The late nights, the whispered questions, the documents you thought I wouldn't notice. You're not just my so-called girlfriend. You're a reporter chasing a story. Claire's breath faltered. Who told you that doesn't matter? He said coldly. What matters is that I trusted you. I let you into my world, into my home. I told you about my mother, my past. I even brought you to meet my sister. His voice cracked for a fleeting second before hardening again. And all along, you were taking notes. Tears stung at the corners of her eyes, but she forced her voice steady. Yes, I came into this with questions. Yes. I looked at your company because the evidence led me there. But, Ethan, it wasn't just a game for me. I didn't plan to. She swallowed, her voice breaking. I didn't plan to feel anything for you. His laugh was harsh, hollow. Feelings. That's what you call this. You made me a fool. Claire. Every smile, every dance, every whispered word, it was all just good material for your next column. She shook her head violently. No, maybe it started that way. But later, she pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Later, it became real. You have to believe me. Believe, he repeated, the word dripping with bitterness. You want me to believe that the woman who's been collecting files on me, who has my so-called signature of guilt on her laptop, actually cares about me. Her voice cracked, tears sliding down her cheeks. I don't know what to believe myself. The documents, the whispers they point to you, but my heart, she stopped, breath shuddering. My heart tells me you're not that man. For the first time, silence stretched between them. Ethan's gaze locked on hers, fury warring with something deeper pain, perhaps. His chest rose and fell, as if the very act of breathing had become labor. At last, he spoke, his voice low and raw. So, all the warmth, all the moments where I let myself think you saw me, Not just the CEO, it was all part of your plan. Claire shook her head desperately. It wasn't a plan. Ethan, please listen to me. I care about the truth. Yes. But I also... Her voice collapsed under the weight of the words. I care about you. More than I ever wanted to. For a flicker of a second, something in his eyes softened, as though her confession had reached him. But then it was gone, buried under the steel of betrayal. It's over, he said flatly. Don't call me. Don't follow me. Don't even think of me again. Ethan, please. He turned, his shoulders rigid, his stride decisive. The door of his car slammed shut, and within seconds the sedan melted into traffic, leaving Claire standing alone on the sidewalk, her chest hollow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the world around her blurring. A pedestrian brushed past, muttering, but Claire barely noticed. She had fought her entire career to stand for truth, to uncover corruption without compromise, and now that same commitment had shattered the only thing that had begun to feel real in years. By the time she returned to her desk, her colleagues' curious glances felt unbearable. She sat in front of her laptop, the cursor blinking against a blank page, her reflection ghosting faintly on the screen. The very story she had been chasing now sat like a weight in her chest. Her head bowed into her hands. Her career was still intact barely, but her heart lay in ruins, scattered across the city like the remnants of something she should never have dared to hope for. And in the quiet of her office, Claire whispered to herself, "Congratulations, Whitmore. You've managed to lose both the story and the man in one morning." The newsroom had quieted for the night. Most of Claire's colleagues had gone home, leaving only the hum of computers and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. She was about to shut down her laptop when her inbox lit up. No subject, no sender, just one line and an attachment. Look deeper. The name you want isn't Marlowe, it's Hale. Claire's heart thudded. She clicked the attachment, her eyes scanning quickly, scanned contracts, internal memos, and transfer authorizations filled the screen. The signatures at the bottom weren't Ethan Marlowe's. They belonged to Richard Hale, Ethan's long-standing vice president. Claire knew the name. Everyone in finance did. Hale was Ethan's right-hand, ambitious, polished, a man who smiled for cameras but carried a reputation for cutting corners. Where Ethan exuded control, Hale exuded hunger. And now, the documents tied him directly to the offshore accounts. She leaned back in her chair, her pulse racing. Could it be this simple? Could Ethan have been innocent all along? The signatures attributed to him forged by the man standing closest at his side before she could dwell on it. Her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. Be careful. Hell doesn't forgive curiosity. Claire's fingers trembled against the screen. She glanced around the empty newsroom, suddenly aware of how alone she was. On her way out, the streets felt different, too quiet, shadows stretching long under the glow of street lamps. She pulled her coat tighter, clutching her bag. Behind her, footsteps echoed, steady, deliberate. She quickened her pace. The footsteps quickened too. Claire's breath caught. She turned sharply down a side street, her heels clattering against the uneven pavement. A quick glance over her shoulder confirmed it. Two men, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark jackets, following. Her mind raced. Don't panic. Think. Spotting a late-night diner at the corner, she ducked inside. The bell above the door chimed, the warm scent of coffee and fried food enveloping her. She slid into a booth, keeping her eyes fixed on the menu, though her hands shook. Through the glass, she saw them linger across the street, their outlines faint under the neon glow. They weren't ordering food. They were waiting, watching. Claire's throat went dry. She forced herself to sip water from the glass on the table, her pulse hammering in her ears. For the first time since this investigation began, she felt truly hunted, and yet another voice rose within her, fierce and defiant. If they're trying to scare you off, it means you're getting close. Her phone buzzed again, another anonymous message. Don't stop. Hale's mask is slipping, but he'll come for you. Claire's grip tightened on her glass. She was in over her head, that much was clear. She wasn't just chasing corruption in some abstract sense anymore. She was stepping into the crosshairs of men who wouldn't hesitate to silence her. She considered, for a fleeting second, walking away, closing her laptop, deleting her files, retreating into safety. But then she thought of the faces she had seen at those glittering galas, the smiles bought with stolen money, the charities underwritten by laundered funds. She thought of Ethan, too, the look in his eyes when he believed she had betrayed him. If Hale was the true architect, then exposing him was the only way to clear Ethan's name. Her conscience sharpened into resolve. No, I can't stop now. Not when the truth is this close. Claire slid a few bills onto the table, rose calmly, and stepped back into the night. The men were gone, vanished into the dark, but she knew they'd return. This was only the beginning. As she walked home, each shadow seemed to stretch too long, each sound too sharp. Her heart pounded, fear twisting with determination. She whispered to herself, steadying her resolve, "You wanted to live two lives, Claire. Well, now you do, and one of them might get you killed." The city was quiet that night, its streets washed in pale light from the half-moon above. Claire left the newsroom late, clutching her bag close, the anonymous leaks from earlier replaying in her mind. Her editor had already demanded results. The whispers in the documents pointed to Richard Hale. But, with every new lead, came fresh danger. Her heels clicked quickly against the pavement. She wasn't imagining it this time. The footsteps behind her were real, heavy, deliberate. She turned a corner, hoping the shadow would dissolve into coincidence. But it didn't. Two men emerged from the dark, blocking her path. Their faces were hard, their eyes flat, their presence radiating menace. "Miss Whitmore," one said, his voice gravelly. "Mr. Hale says it's time you stop digging." Claire's throat tightened. "You don't scare me." Her voice trembled anyway. The second man stepped closer, the glint of metal flashing in his hand, a knife, catching the dim light. "Then, maybe you should be." Her pulse spiked. She staggered back, clutching her bag like a shield. "Think, Claire, think." She darted a glance down the alley, calculating escape routes. But the men closed in, her options narrowing like a vice. And then, an engine roared, tires screeched. A black sedan cut sharply across the curb, its headlights blazing. The door flew open, and Ethan Marlowe stepped out. He looked different in the raw light of the street, taller, more imposing, his black suit stark against the shadows. His eyes burned with a cold fury as they locked on the men. "Touch her," he said, his voice low, gravelly, dangerous, "and you'll regret it." The weight in his tone was heavier than any weapon. For a heartbeat, the men faltered, then, with a muttered curse, they backed away, vanishing into the shadows like phantoms. Claire collapsed against the wall, gasping, her body trembling. She looked up at Ethan, the relief in her chest tangled with 1,000 unspoken words. How did you know where I was?" He didn't move closer. His jaw was tight, his eyes like steel. "I make it a habit not to abandon someone who once stood beside me." The words should have comforted her, but his tone cut deeper than any knife. "You saved me," she whispered, searching his face. Ethan's expression didn't soften. "Don't mistake this for anything it's not. I only saved you so your blood wouldn't be on my conscience." Claire's chest constricted. "Ethan, don't," he said sharply. "Don't call me like that. Not after what you did." Tears stung her eyes, but she forced them back. She wanted to scream, to tell him everything, that she had proof Richard Hale was behind the scheme, that the signatures weren't his, that she never stopped believing in the man she saw beneath the armor. But the mistrust in his eyes froze her words in her throat. Her lips parted, then closed again. Silence won. Ethan's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, his face carved into unreadable lines. Then he turned, walking back toward his car. Claire took a step forward, her voice breaking. You don't believe me." He paused, his back still to her. A bitter laugh escaped him, cold enough to slice through the night. "You hid from me, betrayed me, let the world make me a villain. And now you want belief. Don't expect me to believe anything from you again." The car door slammed. The sedan disappeared into the night, leaving her standing alone beneath the harsh glow of the street lamp. Her body shook, but not from the near attack. It was his words, the finality in them, that shattered her. She pressed her forehead against the cool brick wall, tears spilling freely now. She had fought men with knives, brave shadows that stalked her, but Ethan's mistrust cut deeper than any blade. Her thoughts tangled in a storm. Do I walk away? Do I give up before this consumes me? Or do I fight to clear his name? Even if he never forgives me? The choice clawed at her from both sides. One path promised safety, but surrender. The other promised danger, perhaps ruin, but also the truth. She wiped her cheeks, her resolve solidifying through the ache. Claire had always chosen truth, no matter the cost. And if she had to fight alone to prove Ethan's innocence, then so be it. But deep inside, her heart whispered what her mind refused to admit. I'm not just fighting for truth anymore. I'm fighting for him. It happened fast, too fast for Claire to react. One moment she was stepping out of the newsroom late at night. The next, a black SUV swerved across the curb. The screech of tires echoed off brick walls. A door flew open, and hands rough, merciless, dragged her inside. A cloth pressed over her mouth carried a chemical sting. She thrashed, but the world tilted, blurred, then went dark. When she came to, the air was damp and metallic. Her wrists were bound behind her, her ankles tied to the legs of a chair. A single overhead bulb flickered, throwing harsh shadows across the concrete floor. The smell of oil and rust told her she was in some kind of warehouse. And sitting across from her was Richard Hale. His suit was crisp, his tie knotted perfectly, as though he had come straight from a boardroom to this place of ruin. But his eyes, those sharp, hungry eyes, betrayed the mask of civility. "Miss Whitmore," he said smoothly, his voice laced with contempt. "You've been very busy. Too busy." Claire forced herself to lift her chin, though her heart pounded. "If you're going to kill me, at least don't insult me with small talk." Richard chuckled, slow and cold. "You've got fire. I almost admire that. But admiration won't save you. You've been sniffing around places you don't belong, dragging my name where it doesn't deserve to be. That ends tonight." Her throat was dry, but her voice didn't waver. "I know what you've done. The forged documents, the offshore funds. Ethan may have been blind to it, but I see you clearly." The flicker of irritation in his eyes confirmed it. "You think anyone will believe you?" Richard leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the floor. "Evidence can disappear. Files can vanish. Reporters can have accidents." He drew a knife from his jacket pocket, letting the blade catch the dim light. Claire's pulse raced, but she met his gaze steadily. "I'd rather die than bury the truth." The words hung heavy in the air. Richard's smile vanished, replaced by a cold snarl. He rose, the knife glinting as he stepped closer. And then, the warehouse doors burst open. Shouts filled the air, police voices, commanding and sharp. Flashlights cut through the darkness, beams slicing across the walls. And at the front, moving with lethal focus, was Ethan Marlowe. For a split second, Claire thought she was dreaming, but then she saw the fire in his gray eyes, the tension in his jaw, and she knew this was real. Step away from her. Hale. Ethan's voice thundered, low and fierce. Richard tightened his grip on the knife, his expression twisting. "You shouldn't be here. Ethan, this doesn't concern you. It concerns me when you touch her." Ethan growled. The officers fanned out, weapons raised, their shouts echoing. "Drop it. Hands where we can see them." Richard hesitated, his jaw clenched, then lunged toward Claire. She flinched as the blade slashed, but before it could strike, Ethan was there. He surged forward, grabbing Richard's wrist, twisting it with controlled fury until the knife clattered to the floor. The police swarmed in, forcing Richard to the ground, snapping cuffs around his wrists as he shouted and cursed. Ethan dropped to Claire's side, his breath ragged. "Claire, look at me." Her body trembled, a sharp pain stinging her arm where the blade had grazed her. Blood welled, warm against her skin. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice weak but steady. Ethan's hands, usually so precise, fumbled for once as he untied her restraints. His touch was urgent, trembling with fear he refused to show. "Don't close your eyes. Stay with me." Claire managed a shaky smile. "You're bossy even in a crisis." "Damn it." "Claire," Ethan muttered, his voice breaking as he pressed his hand against her wound to slow the bleeding. "Don't joke. Not now." The officers called for medics, their radios crackling. Richard's curses faded into the background, swallowed by the chaos. For Claire. The world narrowed to Ethan's face, his eyes no longer cold but raw, stripped of every defense. "I thought you hated me," she whispered faintly. Ethan's jaw tightened, emotion choking his words. "I thought I did too, until I saw you tied to that chair, bleeding, and I realized I fear nothing in this world, except losing you." Her chest tightened, her eyes brimming despite the pain. She wanted to tell him everything, that she had proof of his innocence, that she never stopped believing in the man behind the armor. But her strength faltered, the edges of her vision dimming. "Ethan," she whispered, "promise me. If I don't you dare." He cut in, his voice fierce, almost desperate. "You're going to live. I won't let it be otherwise." Sirens wailed outside as paramedics rushed in. They lifted Claire onto a stretcher, Ethan's hand never leaving hers. His suit was smeared with her blood, his expression carved with fear he couldn't hide. As they wheeled her out of the warehouse, Claire's gaze locked on Ethan's, and in that moment, despite the pain, despite the chaos, she knew the truth. The man she thought she had lost still cared. And now, with Richard Hale exposed, there was still a chance to fight for both justice and the fragile bond between them. The hospital room was stark white, the kind of place where time seemed to stall. Machines hummed softly, a steady rhythm of beeps charting Claire's fragile heartbeat. Outside the window, dawn crept slowly over Savannah, painting the sky with pale streaks of rose and gold. Ethan Marlowe sat in the chair beside her bed. His tailored suit was rumpled, stained with her blood, but he hadn't noticed. He hadn't moved much since she was wheeled in. His elbows rested on his knees, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles blanched. His gray eyes, usually so controlled, were rimmed red from sleepless hours. He had faced hostile boards, lawsuits, and billion-dollar crises without flinching. But now, sitting beside her limp hand, he felt fear in a way he never had before. "Claire," he whispered, his voice low, almost breaking. "I was a fool. I doubted you. I let my pride blind me, and it nearly cost me." His words faltered, his throat tightening. He leaned forward, pressing his lips gently against her hand. "Don't leave me, I swear. I'll never forgive myself if you do." For a long while, only the quiet beep of the monitor filled the room. Then, faintly, her lashes fluttered. Ethan shot upright, his breath catching. "Claire." Her eyes opened slowly, hazy but alive. She blinked, her gaze searching the room before finding him. "Ethan." Her voice was weak, but the single word made his chest break open. "I'm here," he said quickly, leaning close. Relief washed over his face, mingled with tears he didn't bother to hide. "You're safe now." She tried to smile, though the effort pulled at her stitches. "Alive." "Huh? Alive," he echoed, a shaky laugh escaping. "Thank God." Silence hung between them, heavy yet tender. Claire studied him, her heart stirring at the sight of this man, usually so impenetrable, looking like a lost boy, afraid of the dark. "You didn't have to stay," she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I couldn't leave." The moment they closed those doors, I thought his voice cracked. He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "Claire, I thought I was about to lose the only person who's ever made me want to be more than this. He gestured faintly, as though the weight of his empire meant nothing compared to her. Her breath caught. For all his wealth, for all his control, here he was, stripped bare. Ethan. He shook his head, his voice rough. I'm sorry. For doubting you. For thinking the worst when all you ever wanted was the truth. You deserve my trust, and I gave you suspicion. You deserve protection, and I gave you distance. And still, you nearly died because of my world. Claire lifted her hand, weak but determined, brushing her fingers against his. You saved me. Don't forget that. I almost didn't, he murmured, his forehead pressing gently against her hand. And the thought of losing you, Claire, it terrified me. I don't know how to live with that fear, but I know one thing now. I don't want to live without you. Her eyes blurred with tears. The truth weighed heavy on her chest, and she could no longer hold it back. I love you. Ethan. The words slipped out fragile, trembling, but truer than anything she had ever written or spoken. Ethan froze, his breath hitching. Slowly, his eyes rose to hers, wide and vulnerable. Say it again. Claire's lips curved faintly, her voice steadier this time. I love you. Despite the chaos, despite everything trying to pull us apart, my heart, it chose you. For a moment, he simply stared, as though afraid he had imagined it. Then his face broke, raw emotion flooding through. He took her hand firmly, pressing it against his heart. And I love you. God help me. I think I have since the night you nearly fell in those heels. But I was too proud, too blind to admit it. Her laugh was soft, broken by tears. You're confessing in a hospital room. I'm still in a gown with tubes sticking out of me. All the better, he said, his lips curving in a fragile smile. Because I don't care what you're wearing. I just care that you're here. Their hands clasped tightly, the beeping monitor a steady witness to their vows. No more pretending, Claire whispered, her tears spilling freely. No more pretending, Ethan echoed, his voice firm. He leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against hers. From this moment, it's real. Whatever storms come, we face them together. Her heart swelled, fragile yet fierce. For once, she felt no division between her duty as a journalist and her heart as a woman. For once, she allowed herself to believe in both truth and love. The morning light broke fully through the window, casting a warm glow across the room. The storm had not ended, not with hail still to stand trial, not with the world still watching, but here, in this sterile hospital room, they had found a fragile, unshakable truth. They had found each other. The newsroom buzzed like a hive, louder than Claire had ever heard it. Phones rang non-stop. Screens lit up with breaking alerts. Colleagues darted between desks, murmuring, whispering, speculating. And at the center of it all sat Claire Whitmore, her laptop open, her fingers steady despite the storm swirling around her. On the screen, her article neared completion. Every sentence was precise, every citation carefully placed. She had the contracts bearing Richard Hale's signature, the bank transfers tracing offshore accounts, the testimony of insiders who had finally dared to speak. For weeks she had lived in fear of shadows, but now the truth stood tall, undeniable. She typed the final line, her heart pounding. The scandal that threatened to consume Marlowe Industries was not the work of its CEO, Ethan Marlowe, but of his deputy, Richard Hale, whose ambition led him to forge signatures, funnel funds, and betray the very company he swore to serve. She hit publish. The ripple was instant. Within minutes, her article was picked up by national outlets. Social media feeds filled with hashtags. One Hale exposed. Marlowe cleared. Claire leaned back in her chair, her chest heavy with relief and exhaustion. But she knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom was packed days later. Journalists filled the benches, cameras lined the steps outside, and the air buzzed with tension. Richard Hale sat at the defense table, his once polished image shattered. Gone was the perfect tie, the confident smirk. Now he looked smaller, cornered, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. The prosecution laid out the evidence, piece-by-piece contracts with Hale's handwriting, testimonies from accountants coerced into silence, the offshore trail of money laundering. Claire's article had been the foundation, but now the full weight of the law bore down on him. Ethan Marlowe sat across the aisle, his presence commanding despite the ordeal. He wore a dark suit, his expression calm, but his eyes carried the storm of the past months. Each forged signature revealed, each betrayal uncovered, only deepened the weight he carried. At last, the judge's gavel struck. Richard Hale was denied bail, awaiting trial on charges that could end his career and his freedom. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters scrambled for quotes, but Ethan remained still, his gaze shifting only once toward Claire. A week later, the corporate world turned its eyes to a press conference at Marlowe Industries headquarters. The glass atrium gleamed, filled with reporters and cameras. At the podium, Ethan stood tall, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders, yet lightened by vindication. "I stand before you today," he began, his deep voice echoing across the hall, "not as a man without fault, but as one who has been given the rare gift of truth revealed." Flashbulbs snapped, pens scratched furiously. For weeks, my name was dragged through suspicion, and though my company's foundations shook, one voice refused to let falsehood win. Claire Whitmore risked her career, her safety, and her life to expose the real architect of betrayal, Richard Hale. The crowd stirred, whispers swelling. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling, eyes darting to Claire, where she stood quietly at the side of the hall. Ethan's gaze sought hers, steady and unwavering. "Miss Whitmore is not just a journalist. She is proof that truth, though fragile, can survive against the strongest lies. She reminded all of us that integrity matters more than power." His tone softened, though his words carried for every ear to hear. "And she reminded me what it means to trust." For the first time in weeks, Claire felt her throat tighten not from fear, but from emotion. Reporters fired questions about Hale's trial, about the company's future, but Ethan's focus never left her. When the conference ended, he stepped away from the podium, walking toward her through the sea of flashing cameras. He didn't stop when he reached her. He simply extended his hand. The gesture was small, quiet amid the roar of the press. But to Claire, it meant everything. She placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers, firm and certain. And in that crowded atrium, with the world watching, Ethan Marlowe declared without words what he had already said in private. No more pretending. That night, as the city lights reflected on the river, Claire sat alone on her balcony, the cool air brushing her face. Her phone buzzed with messages, colleagues congratulating her, strangers calling her brave, yet her thoughts lingered only on the man who had faced the storm beside her. The battle wasn't over. There would be trials, fallout, rebuilding, but for the first time, she felt something steady, something lasting. She whispered into the night, a vow to herself and to him. We cleared the shadows. Now, it's time for the light. The storm had passed, at least for now. Richard Hale was behind bars. Headlines shifted from scandal to speculation, and the world finally stopped pointing fingers at Ethan Marlowe. But for Claire, the real victory wasn't in the courtroom or on the front page. It was here in the quiet, ordinary hours she never thought she'd share with him. One morning, they sat at a small coffee shop tucked along a cobblestone street by the river, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and chipped mugs, where the barista knew most customers by name. It was a far cry from the sleek, glass-walled boardrooms Ethan usually inhabited. Claire sipped her latte, smiling behind the steam as Ethan studied the menu with a seriousness that would have suited a billion-dollar merger. "They all sound the same," he muttered, brow furrowed. "It's coffee." "Ethan, not a contract," Claire teased, nudging his elbow. He gave her a sidelong look, the corner of his mouth twitching. If I sign the wrong thing, I'll regret it for hours. She laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. For months, their lives had been steeped in tension, fear, and mistrust. Now, laughter came easier, like a balm. When his cappuccino finally arrived, Ethan frowned at the heart-shaped foam on top. "Don't overthink it," Claire said, leaning closer. "It's a compliment. Drink before it collapses." He took a sip, grimaced slightly, and admitted, "Too sweet." "Of course," she smirked. "You're more of a straight black coffee kind of man. No sugar, no cream, just punishment." For the first time in weeks, he laughed an unguarded, genuine laugh that reached his eyes. Later that week, they walked by the Savannah riverfront. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of salt from the coast. Street musicians played soft jazz, and the water reflected the golden evening light. Claire slipped her hand into his, not out of pretense or necessity, but simply because she wanted to. Ethan's grip tightened slightly, a quiet promise in the gesture. They paused by the railing, watching boats drift lazily downstream. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sounds of gulls and laughter from nearby diners. At last, Claire broke it. "You ever think about what life would be like without all the pressure? No empire to run, no scandals, no flashing cameras." Ethan's jaw tightened thoughtfully. "I used to think I couldn't survive without it, that the work, the control, it was all I had." He turned to her, his gaze softening. "Now I'm starting to wonder if it was just noise. Maybe this is what matters." Her heart stirred, warmed by the rare vulnerability in his voice. She leaned her head against his shoulder, whispering, "It is." The most surprising moments, though, came at home. One evening, Ethan insisted on cooking. Claire raised an eyebrow but didn't protest. Watching him in her small kitchen was like watching a CEO attempt ballet elegant in intention, awkward in execution. He frowned at the recipe on her counter, sleeves rolled up, tie discarded. "It says sauté. What exactly qualifies as sauté? Is this sauté?" He jabbed the pan a little too aggressively, sending onions skittering across the stovetop. Claire burst out laughing, covering her mouth with her hand. "No, Ethan. That's called an assault, not sauté." His scowl softened into reluctant amusement. "I don't fail at things." "Claire, you just did," she teased, plucking the spoon from his hand. "Step aside before you burn the house down." He crossed his arms, leaning against the counter as she took over. "You enjoy this, don't you? Watching me fumble, immensely." She grinned, stirring the pan with practiced ease. "It makes you human." He fell quiet, his gaze steady on her. "Maybe that's what I've been missing all along." Her movement slowed as she felt the weight of his words. She glanced at him, catching the flicker of sincerity behind his half-smile. And in that small kitchen, filled with the scent of garlic and laughter, she realized something profound. Ethan Marlowe wasn't just letting her into his world. He was learning how to live in hers. Later that night, as they ate at the tiny table by her window, Claire caught herself watching him. Not the CEO, not the man the headlines once painted as ruthless, but the man carefully buttering bread and listening intently as she recounted a silly story about her college days. He wasn't polished or untouchable here. He was present, and that, more than anything, felt like intimacy. When the plates were cleared and the city outside grew quiet, Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles. "Claire," he said softly, almost hesitantly, "do you realize what you've done?" She tilted her head. "Besides saving your company and exposing your corrupt vice president," his smile was faint, but his eyes were unwavering. "You gave me a life I didn't know I wanted. The laughter, the walks, the burnt onions. You gave me normal, and I don't think I'll ever want to let that go." Her breath caught, her chest tightening in the best possible way. She squeezed his hand gently. "Then don't." The world outside still demanded headlines, trials, and statements. But here, In coffee shops and riverside walks, in clumsy meals and soft silences, they found something rarer than vindication. They found healing. They found love, not as a performance, but as something real quiet, imperfect, and utterly their own. The atrium of Marlowe Industries gleamed brighter than ever, polished glass reflecting the camera lights that filled the space. Reporters crowded behind velvet ropes, microphones raised, flashes bursting like fireworks. The scandal had shaken the company, but now the world waited to hear from its CEO, the man once accused, now cleared. Ethan Marlowe stepped onto the stage with his usual commanding presence. His tailored suit was flawless, his posture steady, but his eyes searched only for one face in the crowd. Claire Whitmore stood near the wings, her hands clasped tightly. She wasn't used to this spotlights, cameras, hundreds of eyes tracking her every move. She was a journalist, not a spectacle. Yet today, Ethan had asked her to stand beside him, and she had said yes. The murmur of the crowd hushed as Ethan began to speak. Months ago. His voice resonated across the hall, deep and measured. My name was dragged into shadows. Rumors claimed I was a criminal, a man laundering money behind the facade of respectability. For a time, even I wondered if the truth mattered anymore. He paused, letting the words sink in. But then came someone who refused to let lies prevail. Claire Whitmore. Claire's breath caught as every head turned toward her. She didn't choose the easy path. Ethan continued. She chose danger, sleepless nights, and even threats to her life because she believed the truth was worth it. And in the process, she reminded me that integrity is not a weakness, it is strength, that love is not a liability, it is power. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked. Claire felt her cheeks warm, but her chin lifted proudly. Ethan turned slightly, extending his hand toward her. So, today, I want to be clear not just to you, but to the world. This woman is not just the journalist who saved my name. She is the woman I love, and I will never pretend otherwise again. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a wave of applause. The sound rose like thunder, echoing against the glass walls. Claire's heart raced as she stepped forward, her hand slipping into his. Ethan's grip was firm, steady, his eyes locked on hers. For a moment, the crowd faded, the cameras vanished. It was only the two of them, standing together in truth. That evening, away from the clamor of the press, Ethan guided Claire down the quiet riverwalk where they had once stood in silence weeks ago. The city lights shimmered across the Savannah River, the air cool with a gentle breeze. Street musicians had packed up, leaving only the faint sound of water lapping against the shore. Strange, isn't it? Claire murmured, her arm brushing his as they walked. This city saw us at our worst lies, betrayal, danger, and now it feels like a beginning. Ethan finished softly. They stopped at a familiar railing, where she had once leaned against him half in jest, half in longing. Tonight, the moment felt different. Ethan turned toward her, his expression stripped of all the masks he used to wear. Claire. There was a time I thought power was everything, that the only way to survive was to be untouchable. But you. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. You touch me, you made me human again, and I never want to lose that. Her chest tightened, her throat aching with unshed tears. Ethan? He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. For once, his hands weren't steady. They trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing a simple, elegant ring that glimmered under the lamplight. I can't promise you perfection, he said, his voice low, steady despite the quiver of his hand, but I can promise you honesty, loyalty, and a love that will never again hide behind pretense. Claire Whitmore. Will you give me a new beginning? Will you marry me? Her breath caught. The world seemed to still the river, the city lights, even her own pulse for just that moment. Tears spilled freely as she laughed through them, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. You really know how to pick your moments. I'm standing here in flats, wind in my hair, no makeup, all the better. Ethan interrupted with a faint smile. Because this is real, and I only want real with you. Claire's heart swelled, overflowing with certainty. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking. Then louder, stronger. Yes. Ethan. 1,000 times. Yes. Relief and joy flickered across his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand still trembling. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he'd never let go again. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For the first time in months, it felt like the world was no longer divided into day and night, duty and love. For the first time, everything felt whole. No more pretending. She whispered. He pressed a kiss to her hair, his voice fierce and tender all at once. No more pretending, only forever. The river shimmered under the moonlight, carrying their vows into the night, and there, in the quiet, their new beginning truly began. Autumn draped savannah in gold. The air was crisp, the trees along the riverfront touched with shades of amber and rust. At the Marlowe family estate, the garden had been prepared not for a gala, not for a fundraiser, not for a corporate display, but for a wedding. It was simple, intentionally so. Rows of white chairs lined the lawn, their satin ribbons catching the breeze. Roses, pale and fragrant, framed the aisle. Candles flickered in glass lanterns, casting soft glows beneath the canopy of oaks. Claire Whitmore stood inside the old house, her reflection staring back at her in a tall mirror. Her dress was ivory silk, elegant yet unpretentious, the kind that whispered grace instead of shouting extravagance. In her hands, she held a bouquet of fresh garden roses, nothing more, nothing less. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with a quiet certainty she had never known before. A year ago, she had walked into a wedding alone, sitting at the edge of a ballroom trying to disappear. Tonight, she would walk into her own, every step leading toward the man she had once sworn she would never trust. Emily Marlowe, Ethan's sister, slipped into the room with a mischievous grin. "Relax," she whispered, adjusting the veil that draped over Claire's shoulders. "My brother's outside staring at the altar like he's about to faint. I think you're the calm one here." Claire laughed softly, the sound easing her nerves. "Ethan Marlowe." "Nervous, I don't believe it. You changed him." "Claire," Emily said warmly. "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Before Claire could reply, the music began. Gentle strings floated through the air. Emily squeezed her hand once, then stepped aside. The doors opened. Claire walked slowly down the rose-strewn aisle. Guests rose to their feet, but she saw only one face. Ethan's. He stood at the altar, dressed in a simple black suit, no tie, no icy mask, just Ethan. His gray eyes shimmered, unguarded, brimming with emotion as they followed her every step. When she reached him, he took her hand, steadying her trembling fingers with his own. The world stilled around them. The officiant spoke, his voice calm, resonant. "We gather here not to witness wealth or power or spectacle, but love, love that endured trials, mistrust, even danger. Today, Ethan and Claire choose to lay aside all pretense, all masks, and vow to walk forward together. In truth?" Claire's eyes blurred with tears as Ethan began his vows. "I once believed I had to be perfect," he said, his voice steady though, thick with emotion. "That to survive, I had to be untouchable, unbending, unfeeling. But then you came into my life, unexpected, uninvited, and you refused to let me hide behind that armor. You showed me that love is not weakness, that trust is not risk, but the very thing worth living for. Claire, I vow to love you with honesty, to believe in you even when the world doubts, and to stand by you no matter what storms come. No more pretending, only us, always. Tears slipped down Claire's cheeks as she lifted her vows. When I first met you, Ethan, I thought I was stepping into a role, just a pretend girlfriend at a wedding where I felt out of place. I never imagined it would lead me here. You've tested me, frustrated me, even broken my heart. But you've also saved me, trusted me, and given me a love deeper than I ever thought possible. I vow to love you as you are, imperfect but real, and to never let fear silence the truth between us. No more pretending. From this day, it's forever. The officiant smiled. With these vows spoken, and with the love witnessed here today, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride. Ethan's hands cupped her face gently, reverently. His kiss was tender, sealing not just their vows, but every wound, every fear, every fractured moment of their past. Applause rose, Emily's laughter carrying above the crowd, but Claire and Ethan heard only the beating of each other's hearts. The reception that followed was small and intimate. No $1,000 ice sculptures, no chandeliers dripping with crystals, just a garden strung with warm lights, tables of homemade food, and laughter shared with those closest to them. Later. As the night deepened, Claire and Ethan slipped away to the pond at the edge of the estate. Fireflies danced above the water, their reflections flickering like tiny stars. Claire leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Strange, isn't it? How it all began with one whisper at a wedding, Ethan's arm wrapped around her, pulling her closer. The best lie I ever told, pretend you're with me. She smiled, brushing her fingers against his hand. And now, he murmured, kissing the crown of her head. There's nothing pretend about it. They sat in silence, the night wrapping around them, the future stretching wide and unknown. But neither felt fear anymore, because what began as pretense had become the most real thing in their lives. And with that truth, they stepped into forever, at its heart. This story reminds us that life is rarely what it seems. What began as a pretense at a wedding grew into a journey of trust, sacrifice, and healing. Claire and Ethan teach us that even in a world clouded by suspicion, integrity and honesty shine the brightest. For many of us, especially as we grow older, it's easy to believe that love or even trust is something we left behind in our youth. But Claire's courage and Ethan's vulnerability remind us that it's never too late to open our hearts. Real strength is not found in power, wealth, or appearances. It is found in the quiet choice to believe in another person, even when fear whispers otherwise. Life will always give us reasons to pretend, to hide behind masks, or to protect ourselves with distance. But the moments that matter most, the ones we carry with us, are born from truth. So, perhaps the lesson is simple: dare to live without pretending. Dare to stand for what's right, even when it's hard. And dare to love, fully and without apology. Because that is the one truth that can carry us through any storm. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and walking through this journey of love, trust, and second chances. Stories like this remind us how powerful honesty and compassion can be, even when life feels uncertain. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to our channel so you'll never miss the next story we bring to life. Your support means the world. It helps us continue creating stories that inspire, comfort, and remind us all that hope and love are timeless. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, no more pretending, only truth, only love,